The smoke rising from the stone forge pit was the only thing visible above the tree line. When Liam finally got the angle right on his rearview mirror, he pulled his truck to a stop on the gravel turnoff and killed the engine, sitting there for a moment in the gray morning quiet, watching that thin thread of white curl up and dissolve into the overcast sky from the road. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd swear the hill was just a hill. That was the whole point. And here's what they don't want you to figure out. That hill is warmer than your house right now. It costs less to heat than your garage. And it has been sitting there, invisible to every passing truck, every property assessor. Liam didn't stumble onto this. He researched it, engineered it, and built it himself for under $11,000. The construction industry would prefer you never heard that number. Liam had lived in Alaska for 31 years, long enough to know the difference between a man who was ready and a man who only thought he was. He'd watched neighbors pour money into above-ground cabins, beautiful things with wraparound porches and double-pane windows, only to lose them to ice dams, foundation heave, or the kind of wind that comes off the Alaska range in February and doesn't apologize. He'd watched them scramble to retrofit insulation and weatherproofing after the fact, spending twice what they would have if they'd thought it through from the beginning. Liam had thought it through. He climbed out of the truck and walked the narrow path through the overgrown grass toward the entrance, his boots crunching lightly on the frost-hardened ground. The corrugated steel arches rose ahead of him, two of them connected and buried under nearly 3 feet of soil and moss that had been growing wild and unbothered since he finished the project 4 years ago. The stone forge pit sat off to the left, a shoulder-high cone of flat river rock mortared with clay and sand, its iron cap blackened from years of use. A small fire burned inside it now. He'd stoked it before a supply run, knowing the chill would creep in while he was gone. He pushed open the French doors, salvaged from a demolished Anchorage townhouse, 8 glass panes each, good and heavy, and stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately, not the forced, dry, mechanical warmth of a furnace, cycling on and off all night. Real warmth, stable warmth, the kind that lives in the bones of a structure the earth has been cradling for 4 winters. Inside, the 2 Quonset sections opened into each other through a wide archway he'd cut himself with a plasma torch and framed with welded rebar. The first section was a working space, a long steel workbench, shelves of canned goods and dry staples reaching floor to ceiling on the curved walls, a propane cookstove with 3 burners, and a chest freezer humming steadily against the far wall. Extension cords ran neatly along conduit clipped to the steel ribs. A small pellet stove sat in the corner with its insulated pipe running up to one of the roof vents he'd added, just one of 6 vents penetrating the sod above, each capped with a squat galvanized hood that shed rain and prevented backdraft. The second section was living space, a bed frame built from welded angle iron and topped with a foam mattress he'd hauled in on a sled 3 winters ago, a reading chair, 2 battery banks on a low shelf, fed by a pair of solar panels he'd mounted flat into the roof of the east-facing section, angled just enough to catch the low winter sun. A small entertainment unit built into the curved wall with a 12-volt television and a hard drive full of downloaded films. A composting toilet tucked behind a curtain. And at the far end his pride, a wood-fired shower he'd plumbed himself using a coil of copper pipe run to the back wall of the pellet stove's firebox, gravity-fed from a 50-gallon tank stored in an insulated compartment above. Liam set his supply bags down on the workbench and started putting things away. He thought about what his brother had said during their last phone call, sometime back in August. "You're burying yourself alive up there." His brother meant it as a criticism, maybe even a joke. But Liam had turned the phrase over his mind on the long drive home and found it accurate in ways his brother hadn't intended. Yes, he was burying himself. That was precisely the idea. Here's what the modern construction industry never teaches you, because it has no financial interest in you knowing it. The Earth is the oldest insulation technology on the planet, and it is still the best one. Every traditional culture that survived serious winters without a utility bill understood this. The Norse buried their longhouses under heaped turf. The Plains peoples built their earthen lodges half into ground and never shivered through the night. The Icelanders constructed communal sleeping rooms partially submerged in the hillside, trapped geothermal stability. These weren't primitive workarounds. They were engineering solutions that the modern era abandoned not, because something better came along, but because something more profitable did. You didn't fight the cold by standing above it and throwing money at it. You got under it. You used the stable thermal mass of the ground itself, which in most of Alaska sits at a year-round temperature somewhere between 34 and 42 degrees Fahrenheit, to put a thermal floor under your heating needs that no blizzard could ever touch. The atmosphere can drop to -50. The earth 3 feet below your feet does not care. It hasn't cared for 10,000 years. It isn't going to start. A Quonset hull buried under 3 feet of packed soil doesn't care what the wind chill is. It doesn't care if it's -40 and the gusts are coming in at 60 miles per hour and the power is out across 3 counties. The earth above it keeps the interior temperature from swinging more than a few degrees in either direction, regardless of what the atmosphere is doing overhead. In January, when Liam's nearest neighbor, a good man named Garrett who ran a small trap line to the east, was burning through 40 gallons of heating oil a week just to keep his above-ground cabin at 55 degrees. Liam was burning through half a bag of pellets a day and sitting comfortably in a t-shirt reading a paperback. Half a bag of pellets per day in an Alaskan January. He'd done the math before he started, because Liam was the kind of man who did the math before he started. The Quonset huts themselves had been purchased used from a military surplus dealer outside Fairbanks. 2 20-foot sections at $800 each. He'd rented a small excavator for 3 days to dig out the hillside site he'd chosen, a south-facing slope that gave him natural drainage and passive solar exposure, and that had run him another $1,200. Steel rebar, mesh, and spray foam for the interior had been maybe $2,000 more. The sod roofing had cost him nothing except labor. He'd cut and stacked it himself on the cleared site over the course of a single long summer weekend, working from first light until he couldn't see any more. Total outlay, including the French doors, the pellet stove, the solar panels, the battery banks, the composting toilet, and all the plumbing copper, just under $11,000. Write that number down. $11,000. The above-ground cabin his neighbor Garrett had built 2 years prior. Nothing fancy. A basic 24 by 32 rectangle with a simple shed roof had cost him $87,000 by the time the contract was done and the last permit was filed. It hemorrhaged heat like a sieve and sat exposed on a flat clearing that caught every gust off the ridge. $87,000 for a structure that actively fought the climate it was built inside. $11,000 for a structure the climate doesn't even know exists. Liam wasn't interested in judging Garrett. Garrett was a capable man who made his own choices. But Liam knew which structure would still be standing and fully functional in 20 years, and which one would be fighting a losing battle against the elements from the day the warranty expired. He knew which owner would be writing checks to the heating oil company every February, and which one would be reading by lamplight without a bill in sight. He poured himself a mug of coffee from the percolator he kept warm on the back burner and carried it to the reading chair in the second section. The overhead light, a 12-volt LED strip wired to the battery bank, cast a clean white glow across the curved ceiling. He'd painted the interior walls and ceiling with a bright white epoxy paint specifically to balance that light around and make the space feel larger than it was. It worked. People who visited for the first time always commented on how open it felt inside, which surprised them because from outside it looked like nothing at all. That was something else Liam had thought about carefully. The question of visibility. He was not, he would have told you, a paranoid man. He didn't lose sleep over elaborate scenarios. But he was a practical one. And practicality in Alaska, real Alaska, not the version tourists imagine from their cruise ship windows, meant thinking hard about contingencies that softer climates never had to consider. What happens when the road washes out for 3 weeks? What happens when the supply chain buckles and the store shelves in the nearest town go thin? What happens when a hard freeze comes 6 weeks early and the heating oil truck can't get through? These weren't hypotheticals invented by anxious minds. They were things that had happened, things that happened regularly, things that Liam had personally lived through more than once and watched other men handle badly. A structure that was invisible from the road was a structure that didn't advertise its resources. This wasn't about hostility toward neighbors. It was about understanding human nature under stress. When things got hard, People look for solutions, and a visible, well-stocked homestead was a solution that other desperate people might want to claim for themselves. Liam had seen enough of that dynamic play out in smaller emergencies. The ice storm of 2012, the spring flooding of 2019, to have no illusions about how fast social norms could dissolve when survival pressure mounted high enough and long enough. From the road, Liam's property looked like a mossy hillside with a few pipes sticking out of the top and an old fire pit. That was it. Nothing worth stopping for. Nothing worth investigating. His truck, when he was home, he parked in a stand of spruce trees 100 yards from the entrance, tucked under a tarp in winter, surrounded by enough undergrowth in summer to break its silhouette completely. He'd installed no exterior lighting, no flagpoles, no decorative elements of any kind. The French doors were the only hint that something lived here, and they were recessed into the hillside entrance in a way that kept them in shadow during most of the day. Drive past at 40 miles per hour, and you would see a hill. That was what he had designed you to see. That was what you would see. He finished his coffee and went back to the workbench to sort the last of his supplies. The physical labor of maintaining the place kept him lean and deliberate in a way he quietly appreciated. There was always something to do, monitoring the moisture sensors he'd buried in the sod above to track saturation levels during the snowmelt, checking the battery charge levels and adjusting the panel angle with the seasons, cycling through his food stores to keep the rotation honest, splitting wood for the forge pit, running a hand pump to move water from the cistern to the elevated gravity tank. None of it was backbreaking work. Most of it was just consistent, attentive work, the kind that rewarded a man who paid attention and punished one who didn't. That kind of work suited Liam down to the bone. He designed the ventilation system himself, spending 3 weeks reading everything he could find about underground structures before he sank a single shovel into that hillside. 6 vents total, each independently capped. 2 of them fitted with small 12-volt fans. He could run to boost airflow during the shoulder seasons when condensation was the primary threat. The vents were positioned to create a natural cross-draft when open in combination, drawing fresh air into the lower east vents and exhausting stale air through the higher west ones. He never once had a moisture problem inside the structure, not in 4 years. The epoxy floor he'd poured over rigid foam insulation drained any incidental water to a central sump in the corner of the first section, where a small submersible pump moved it out through a buried drain line and dispersed it 20 feet away to a gravel field drain. This is the part the online forums always get wrong, by the way. They treat underground structures like they're inherently damp, inherently dark, inherently claustrophobic. That reputation belongs to basements. Unventilated, poorly drained, uninsulated concrete boxes dug under houses that were never designed for human occupation. A purpose-built underground Quonset with a proper ventilation design, a sealed and insulated floor, and interior surfaces painted for light reflection is none of those things. It is dry. It is bright. It is stable. And in the depth of an Alaskan winter, it is the most comfortable room you have ever sat in. Outside, the light was starting to go. The overcast had thickened during the afternoon, and the temperature was dropping steadily. Liam went out and fed more wood to the forge pit, watching the fires settle and brighten, throwing orange light across the grass and the rough stone cone. The smoke rose straight up in the still air. He stood there for a few minutes, hands in his jacket pockets, listening to the spruce trees whisper on the ridge above him. He thought about Garrett again. He'd have to go check on him before the week was out. Garrett's wife had left for Anchorage in September and hadn't come back, and the man had been quiet since then in a way that was different from his usual quiet. Liam had a standing practice of keeping track of the people in his circle, especially when those people didn't ask to be tracked. The network of attention was its own form of infrastructure. A man alone in the bush with no one watching him was a man one bad day away from a problem nobody would find until spring. You built your shelter. You stocked your stores. And then you kept your eye on the people around you, because all of it came to nothing if you let the human network go slack. He went back inside, closed the French doors, and threw the heavy bolt. The pellet stove ticked and murmured in the corner. The LED strip glowed steady and clean overhead. Outside, the temperature was probably dropping below 20 degrees. Inside, Liam peeled off his jacket and hung it on the hook by the door and went to start his dinner in a warmth of structure that the winter did not know how to reach. had never known how to reach, would never know how to reach. He'd buried himself alive up there, his brother had said. Smart Alaskans have been doing exactly that for longer than the building code has existed, longer than the heating oil industry, longer than the contractor who charged Garrett $87,000 for a box that leaks heat into the sky every night from now until it rots. The knowledge didn't disappear. It got inconvenient for people who make money selling you the alternative. It got buried, same as the structures themselves, and left there for anyone patient enough and curious enough to dig it back up. Liam stirred the pot and smiled at the curved white ceiling and said nothing to no one, because there was no one to say it to, and because the ceiling didn't need convincing, and because the earth above him, 3 feet of dark and patient soil, was doing exactly what earth has always done for the men wise enough to get beneath it, holding the heat in, keeping the cold out, asking nothing, giving everything. He ate his dinner slow, cleaned his dishes, and read until the battery bank's indicator light told him it was time to sleep. He closed the book, switched off the light, and lay in the dark listening to the absolute silence of a hillside that the world had forgotten was anything other than a hillside. That silence had a cost, under $11,000. For years ago, it had been earning interest ever since.